So again, thank you for joining. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what we are going to see today. So we're going to basically talk about what this workshop is going to be about, and the flow of this workshop is me thinking about what did I not know when I started doing AI education projects. So what kind of evaluations exist and what kind of data we should collect. So we're gonna deep dive into different evaluation strategies and kind of the understanding what kind of data sources we should collect so that we can do those kinds of evaluation now that we're starting working on these projects. Then we're going to talk a little bit about a cluster specific evaluations and think about some of the case studies and how should you evaluate, for example, if your project is in cluster 1 or cluster 2 or cluster 3. And then we're going to wrap up and talk about the next steps of the workshop. So obviously, what I said as the goals of today's workshop is to talk about different kinds of evaluation that we have, right? So for example, talking about what types of evaluations exist and when we would use those evaluations as well. Then we're going to talk about the data collection associated to each one of those evaluations that we talked about. And then we're going to see some examples across different kinds of clusters that we have. But before I start, I want to talk about like putting it in perspective of why we want to do evaluation and kind of think about different evaluation types that we see. Where would they fit in this kind of reasoning behind why we're doing evaluations for the projects? So the first thing is that we want to have some kind of a measurable um, outcome so that we can use those information in order to do project improvement. So we can kind of use it as some kind of a signal in a loop that we can keep evaluating and keep improving the work that we're doing. It will also help us to do iterative improvement, as we talked about. It will also help us inform equitable and ethical AI integration because we're dealing with curriculum. We're talking about professional development for faculty and also training students and providing AI literacy. So it's really important to just be informed in terms of what kind of improvement we're providing to our faculty and to students as well. And just generally tell a very coherent story and results to stakeholders. And in this case, the stakeholders are our Learning Lab colleagues, but beyond that, kind of seeing what are the kinds of reporting that Learning Lab needs to do so that they can kind of show that these initiatives are moving the needle in California higher ed system as well. So let's talk about evaluation. So just kind of a warning that this section is going to be a little bit long, but it is a very comprehensive section talking about different evaluation types. And again, some of you might have heard about these kinds of evaluation that we're going to talk about today, but this is kind of helpful for everyone to be on the same page as you're starting working on your projects, because not all of us come with evaluation or qualitative kind of research, but it's helpful to just have the same understanding as we go through the project evaluation and project implementation. So the first kind of evaluation that we do is kind of similar to how we're doing assessment in our classes. So it's called formative evaluation. So generally, formative evaluation is used in cases that we want to just do some kind of ongoing assessment. So these kinds of ongoing assessments are the cases that we want to get a quick signal, improve something to see, for example, if you're on the right track or not, and just go on with continued implementation or iterative improvement of the project. So generally, when we do formative evaluation, is that during the pilot phases, we do it during the initial rollouts. And as you can kind of imagine, it's a really ongoing process that's going on. So the kind of data examples that we collect for formative evaluation is like really quick signals that we collect, like quick pulse check from the students, getting some information from faculty, getting like quick feedback in terms of surveys or in terms of in-app feedback that we can get, or just looking at the testing logs. If, for example, you're building a tutoring system for students, is there a way that you can get quick signal from the students, whether the hints are helpful or just kind of the student experiences or user experiences as they start interacting with the system. So as I said, it's generally used for adjusting the tools that we're building or instructional technologies that we're strategies that we're building for PD for faculty or for curriculum development or for any adaptive learning system that your projects are building, so that we can kind of figure out the issues that needs to be addressed and things that needs to be improved. So this is formative evaluation. It's very similar to formative assessment as we teach courses. So formative assessment types when we teach courses is like quizzes that the students can get multiple tries at up until the point that they learn stuff. So it's kind of forming their knowledge about whether they're on the same page with the instructor, they're following, and are there things that needs to be improved in terms of the instruction that we're delivering. But on the other hand, at the end of the semester, usually we do summative assessment. This is similar to like exams that we're running. So kind of similarly, the summative evaluation for the project is our cumulative assessment at the end of the project. So thinking about at the end of the cycle, at the end of the module, at the end of the semester, for example, deployment of your adaptive learning system in a course or the curriculum that you use, that you design and you use in a course, how would you go ahead and evaluate it? That kind of evaluation that we do at the end of each phase is called summative evaluation. The type of data that we generally use in those cases is just generally any signal that exists at the end of a period. Like, for example, the final exam scores, completion rates, again, any signal that you're collecting at the end of a certain a phase that exists. And sometimes we also run surveys. So when you were saying that in evaluation, you would do survey in terms of figuring out how helpful a certain system has been for students. So you're thinking about doing summative assessment at the end of a certain phase. And again, the purposes are kind of clear. It gives us an overall effectiveness of the system that we have had. So these were kind of the preliminaries of how we are doing the evaluation, whether in cycle or at the end of a cycle. But there are other types of evaluations that we can also do. And I think this is what's going to be the most useful for most of us and most of the projects. This type of evaluation is called pre-post assessment. Generally, what is done, the way that it's done is that we will compare kind of learners' skills, attitudes, or knowledge before and after a certain kind of intervention. So again, if you're thinking of deploying an adaptive learning system in a semester for certain types of students, you could think about doing a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. So that if you think about your system deployment, your curriculum deployment as an intervention, you can kind of figure out what the deltas are going to look like. Generally, the deltas that we're looking at are like academic deltas and non-academic deltas, right? So academic deltas, things that we can measure such as confidence, self-efficacy, sense of belonging, science identity, and all of those things. And I have a certain set of instruments that you can directly use that measures those things. So you can directly say that, oh, like looking at the student science motivation or sense of belonging, this kind of intervention that we did has improved that certain non-academic index that we've had. Sometimes we'll also try to use the intervention in order to improve academic outcomes. So in those cases, if you have a way of measuring a student's skills before and after the project, so this is the kind of pre-post assessment that we're doing. Again, it's a very useful kind of assessment that will help us to do evaluation of the effectiveness of the tool or the system or a curriculum without needing to have a control group. Because having a control group, having to go through the IRB approval for just having a control versus treatment group, and it's really tricky in educational systems, this is kind of probably going to be your to-go place. The other kind of evaluation that we do is we could say that, oh, we're going to divide groups, divide the students into two groups, but we're not going to randomly assign them. So this is the case that you would let the students to self-select which group they want to be part of. Like, for example, I have a AI tutoring system that I deployed in a programming course, and I told the students that everyone is free to use it, but they have to let us know if they're going to use it or not. And if they don't sign up or opt into using that system, they're going to be in the second group. That the second group is the group that's not using AI tutoring systems. So this is kind of in parallel to having a full experimental control group where you randomly assign students or faculty or like participants into two groups randomly so that you can do control randomized trial in those cases. The reason that a lot of times we use these kinds of experimental design is that we want to establish causal impact. We want to say that controlling for all other variables, what is the impact of a system that we built? What is the impact of the curriculum that we created? So that's mostly why we want to use these kinds of experimental design. The main issue is that going through IRB approval so that you can do these kinds of evaluation is very, very difficult, especially for some of the fast projects. Probably you don't have time to go through the IRB approval so that you can do these kinds of evaluation. So the best case scenario is, for example, resorting back to kind of doing pre-post assessment and using that information plus historical data in order to use historical data in order to establish a baseline, and then kind of looking at pre-post deltas that you're going to get in order to evaluate the impact of your project. There is another kind of evaluation that's called rubric-based assessment. So rubric-based assessment is really helpful because you can decide about some kind of a scoring rubric, and you will use this scoring rubric in order to be able to evaluate some qualitative information that you have from your project. So, for example, you have student essays, you have presentations, you have like some coding projects. But what you will use is you will have a certain rubric system that based on that rubric system, you will go ahead and evaluate essays. So this is kind of an essay grading kind of system that you follow a certain rubric and you will basically decide what is the quality of this work, and then using that quality measurement in order to measure, for example, what was the impact of the AI literacy curriculum that you created? What is the impact of the general curriculum that you created with AI versus non-AI? So you can basically do those kinds of rubric-based assessments as well. The helpful part of the rubric-based assessment is that it's very explainable because it provides a structured feedback, and you know that, okay, like if in the assessment I got, for example, 8 out of 10, what are the contributions of different categories, and where is the place that the project is lacking some high score, and where are the rooms for improvement? So that's very helpful in those cases that other kinds of evaluations would not probably give you those kinds of insights. And probably we all are aware of qualitative evaluation. Qualitative evaluation is that could we use some observational data in order to do evaluation? So this is really kind of an interesting kind of evaluation because it gives you informal kind of insights and summaries into how the project is going and how project evaluation should perform on top of any kind of qualitative evaluation that you've done. So the general types of data that we collect for qualitative evaluation is that we do interviews, we do open-ended survey questions, we do focus group studies with participants, and I think my AirPod probably died. I'm gonna switch back to my laptop. And in these kinds of evaluations and in these kinds of data, what we will do is we will code these qualitative responses and these interview parts that we collected in order to just do a thematic analysis and say, okay, like across the theme of like how helpful the system was for students. These are general themes that emerged from the interviews. So that's kind of a general high-level information that we can get on top of, again, quantitative evaluation that we do in projects. For those who are doing more work with building systems and deploying systems, and for students to use some additional evaluation that can be helpful is learning analytics evaluation. So learning analytics evaluation is the kind of evaluation that we do where we collect user interactions with a system. So we track user engagement, we track user learning, and based on the data analysis that we do on all of these signals that we collect from user, from both the engagement perspective and from the perspective of learning, we will see what was the impact of the system and what was the impact of different modules in the system and whether there are rooms for improvement or not. So for example, the type of data that we collect in learning analytics kind of evaluation is we can measure time, right? So how much time students are spending on a certain task. For example, if they're solving a programming problem or they're doing math proof, what is the time on task? And the resolution of the task can be different, but it's very important for us to track failure points, productive failure, unproductive failure, error rates, click stream pattern to figure out how system is intuitive for a user to use or unintuitive for a user to use. Whether we, at what points in the interaction system are we losing a student's attention? Because we really want to make sure that they're focusing on the learning task and what are the points that are raising confusion or distraction for students. So again, the purposes of why we do learning analytics is to understand engagement and optimize tool functionality. And these are really important kinds of evaluations that we do. And I'm happy to send papers that have used different kinds of evaluations for people to take a look at to see what are the helpful pieces of those evaluations and on what category of projects should you use those kinds of evaluations as well. The last piece, I believe, that I have here in terms of the types of evaluations is equity-based evaluation. So equity-based evaluation is where you disaggregate your data based on different demographic groups and based on different intersectionality of the students that you have, and just measure the impact of the tool and measure the impact of the curriculum for different subpopulations separately. So this is helpful for us to evaluate, okay, if we're improving AI literacy, how is it impacting different groups, and how are we aware of different like biases that might exist in the systems that we're building. So I also have one section where I want to put everything together in terms of the evaluations, the type of the data that we should collect for each one of those evaluation types, or think about what data sources would be helpful, and also some survey instruments that you can directly use off the shelf and use it. Again, I'm happy to share more resources offline with the groups if you think that, oh, like I'm going to use this specific type of evaluation, but are there specific things that would align better with my project? I would be happy to make recommendations on a project basis. But let's see this general table, giant table. So take a moment to take a look. We have 3 columns here. We have evaluation types, which are all of those evaluation types that we went over, starting from the formative assessment up until the equity assessment that we're looking at. These are some data collected or data types that you can think about collecting that would really be aligned with those kinds of evaluation that you want to do. So for example, for formative assessment, you can just directly use exit tickets or pulse check kind of surveys for users. But for summative, what you want to do is like you want to take a look at a student's pass rate, exam scores, the learning outcomes of the students at the end of the semester or a quarter of taking a course. Here, in the last column, I have example tools and surveys. We will share these slides with you so you can take a look at some of these links that would align with each one of these kinds of evaluation that we have. But some of these information here will make your lives a little bit easier so you can use validated surveys, because we can't just generally say that, oh, I want to do a survey to do formative assessment on, for example, a certain thing, and I'm just going to come up with a set of questions. These set of questions really need to be validated over a population, so that we're sure that they're measuring the exact category or item that we want to measure. So what you have on the right-hand side in the last column is most of the tools and surveys that are validated. So for example, here we have a certain set of assessments for classroom assessment techniques. We have, for example, some value rubric items for the cases that you have a certain rubric-based evaluation that you want to do across different dimensionalities as well. This is also an interesting validated survey on the student assessment of learning gains. So when you want to take a look at the learning gain and the delta between pre-assessment and the post-assessment that you've done, these are really important stuff. This link right here is a work that I've done in a project that I ran for underrepresented students over summer. And we did pre-post evaluation, and we measured 8 different categories of non-academic indicators. And I listed here only 3 of them: science motivation, sense of belonging, self-efficacy. But this paper is a paper that we basically validated the entire set of 8 or 9 different categories of non-academic indicators and the delta that these programs have on the students altogether, so you can directly use them as well. We also included for equity evaluation, culturally responsive teaching rubric or equity scorecard that you can also use in order to do those kinds of evaluations as well. So again, we'll share these slides with you so you can use these assessments and tools that we're sharing, but I'm also happy to sit down with projects and kind of see that, oh, like our project needs to have formative assessment plus pre-post plus qualitative research. So how to best connect different tools and surveys together so that it's a comprehensive evaluation that can be done. All right. So next is, let's now think a little bit about our projects. And I know that there's also a question. Let's talk about our projects and see that based on your project, what kind of evaluation do you think your project needs to have? And there's obviously more than one of these categories that would apply to your project. Again, to answer this poll question, you can scan the QR code or you can go to slido.com, enter that 7-digit code, and start responding to this poll. All right, there was a question, so feel free to unmute and ask. Yes, please go ahead.
I have a question. I'm a little bit confused because I see you have all these different types of evaluation, but I thought all these evaluation can be classified within formative and summative and not separate from.
True. If you actually think about, like, I don't think that they are parallel evaluations. That's a very valid point. A lot of times you would think about, okay, like qualitative evaluation can be formative and can be summative, right? But you can kind of also think about having very informal evaluations when you're doing formative assessment, right? So formative assessment, like all of the different kinds of assessments that we do within the formative category, is not necessarily a formal assessment that we would call it a qualitative assessment versus not. It could potentially be like quick pulse checks that we double check and make sure that the project is on track. So again, to reiterate, it's not that these are parallel sessions. These are different ways of thinking about, okay, like, are you doing a formative qualitative assessment or quantitative summative assessment or not? But also there are some of them that do not fall under formative versus summative. Like, for example, pre-post evaluation is probably none of them, right? So it's a little bit about like it's a little bit formative to give you a baseline when you're doing the pre-assessment, but then when you're doing the post-assessment and you're looking at the deltas, it's a little bit of a summative assessment, but just the two of them together do not fall under one of those specific categories. So here I'm just basically trying to raise awareness about different ways that you can think about evaluation types. Good question. Yufan?
Yeah, so you mentioned about some difficulty of getting the control group to have IRB approval. What's the difficulty? Is that I don't think it's fair to have someone with the AI and someone doesn't?
Very good question. So a lot of times when we do IRB, the IRB would ask that is if the system that you're deploying or the curriculum that you're sharing is going to have differential treatment for different student groups. And if it's going to create differential treatment for different student groups, you should not know as a priori that one of the groups is going to be better than the other group. So this is kind of similar to the clinical assessments that they do that, okay, as soon as like they for example have a medication for cancer treatment, right? And they do a control randomized trial, and as soon as they identify that there is actually known and statistically significant benefit to the medication, they would cancel the research and move everyone from the control group to the treatment group. So you can't actually disadvantage a group with by knowing that you're disadvantaging them when you're doing the human subject research. So that's why, especially in education, if you have some prior information and prior assumption, you can't really put the students randomly in a disadvantaged group. So that's why generally it's a very difficult thing to do. And I've not seen that being done in just like institutional sense. Like for example, you won't see a specific institution letting a faculty do like randomized control trial in a classroom because all students are supposed to have equal kind of access to the resources. But I've seen, for example, in large MOOC courses that the students are not registered for the university and they're just getting some free benefit that they might be able to put IRBs together that do randomized control trial for all the users online.
I see. So the major idea is that if you know there's gonna be benefit to have AI, then it's hard to argue, right? But then because our material is just developed, so just like the survey questions, we haven't been validated. So how do we know like we have known benefit to the students? So in that case, I think could be argued to the IRB. And also the way I plan to do it is because we have 20 faculty sign up so we plan to have 10 faculty, randomly select 10 to participate in the fall 2025, and the rest, the other 10 will participate in the spring 2026. So this way I can create a staggered different difference. So that means all the 20, they are motivated to participate. They already signed the contract, and 10 of them haven't been treated, and they are being randomly selected to be treated in the subsequent semester. So this way, I have a really rigorous causal inferences between the two groups. So what do you think about this method?
I don't think that it's a full randomized control trial in that case. So I don't think that you'll have IRB issue in that scenario. So you're effectively letting instructors self-select into the semester that they want to participate in your study, right? So that's kind of
Not self-select, random assigned. So 20. So we already done our recruitment orientation. So initially there were 50 faculty interested, but majority of them drop out. So 20 of them stay. So they consent, they want to participate, they will get the stipend. So out of the 20, I'm gonna just do a random draw. So 50-50 split. So 10 of them gonna participate this semester. I would dictate them who gonna participate based on the random draw instead of letting them self-select.
Yeah, I'm thinking about whether that would raise anything with IRB. I think It won't raise an issue because it's faculty involved and it's voluntary participation. But because if this was a classroom setup where like all students are supposed to have a fair treatment, you should give everyone equal opportunity. But technically, when you're supporting faculty, you're not obligated to support all faculty that exist in California, right? So you have to select a subset, and it's a very natural thing for you to select from people who volunteered, and then based on your capacity, you divide them into 2 semesters. So I don't think that that would be an issue. I think the issue is generally when you're dealing with the students.
Oh,
I can
that's
actually find the criterias and exact criterias and share it with you all afterwards. But I don't think that that's an issue with faculty. It's technically your capacity issue that they can
right.
an issue with.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. And the related question is that so when you say about collecting the learning outcomes, such as like exam questions, etc. So how do you get those from all the faculty, all 20 participating faculty? What's the good way to collect those information? Because I found that it's be very hard if that faculty kind of export and send it to you. It will be difficult. I know like on Canvas, you have the Canvas form, kind of similar to Google form. So that way you can get a more structured data and then ask faculty to share it with the anonymize with the kind of unique ID for each student instead of using the name and the student ID. So what's your recommendation?
I don't think that I understood the entire setup completely. It's so you're supporting a number of faculty. Those faculty are basically using uh something in their classrooms, and those classrooms have learning outcomes, and you want to actually track learning outcomes or learning gains for students in those courses. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But
I
the problem
think
is how to access that data in a kind of standardized, scalable way.
You can get an IRB exemption as long as those faculty are project participants to your project. Because technically for course improvement, any faculty can collect data, right? And if you argue and they argue that they're collecting this data and they're sharing this data in order to improve courses over multiple different semesters, then they can share this data with you by just anonymizing a student information. So there is a specific IRB exemption category that's for improving educational outcomes, and it's under, I think there's a section that's called um, existing educational practices. So technically faculty can collect anything or do anything in their course to improve educational practices. Like you can basically like have a dance session in your course and say that it's gonna improve educational practices or improve education in my course, and that will be IRB exempt. But you have to go through an IRB exempt. All faculty need to complete an IRB or human subject requirement course.
Oh, I see. Awesome. And then my final question is that some faculty asked me a question about email from Learning Lab about because California government the budget issue. So they
I'll have to ask that in the chats because
oh,
for
okay,
the sake
sure.
of time I need to move on.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll have time at the end to talk a little bit about uh project specific questions, and also I'm opening up one-on-one appointments for projects. So I'll give you a link at the end of today's workshop so you can also sign up and we can talk about your project specifically. So thank you for the questions. And thank you to all those who responded to these evaluation types. So let's now talk a little bit about what data are you still unsure how you want to collect. So again, respond to this. But anything else that's still unclear from the things that we talked about? Anything that people want to share? This is a little bit more quiet than previous workshops, and that is fine. Okay, let me move on. So let's talk a little bit about cluster specific evaluations that we should think about. And I have some questions here as well. So the first thing is that if you're assuming that you're building some AI-powered tutors, some adaptive learning systems, to help the students navigate their learning more efficiently, better provide some kind of a hint, some kind of a help, or some kind of a signal to students as they're going through, like, for example, solving problems or something. What is the most valuable metric that you think you should collect in order to evaluate this adaptive tool? So think about all the evaluations that we talked about. What is the important metric that you want to track when you build something for students? I would imagine, for example, the percentage of times that the students are making incorrect attempts, the success rate, things like that would be helpful. But any other thoughts? Usability is really important. And how can we collect usability? So we talked about like having the system have some logging information, right? So you can have user log, you can figure out whether there are issues as the students are interacting with the system. We could do surveys. With every feature rollout, we could do kind of a pulse check from students. Duration of interaction, likability. Yeah, so those who are doing adaptive learning systems in your project, like you can, with a certain frequency, you can ask the students to give you a hint, thumbs up, thumbs down, whether that information is helpful or not helpful, and that is a valuable information that you can get. Engagement, how many students are using it, what's the percentage of the students using it, what's the percentage of time that they're using the system, and the duration of interaction. So these are all good valid points. So we talked about a lot of these things. So the common evaluation approaches when we're evaluating adaptive learning systems is that sometimes we will think about learning analytics, like log data, error rate. So how are students learning? So like looking at a student's learning characteristics or learning patterns using the system versus not using the system. For example, students who opted out of using the system, right? If you don't have randomized control trial. Or for example, looking at the historical trends that, okay, like how many times the students got this certain thing right previously in the last semester versus the semester that we had this system. Some pre-post evaluation on the students' learning. If randomized control trial is possible, you can definitely do that and you'll get a lot of good information. You can also do disaggregated analysis for equity to see, for example, equity from the perspective of preparation, for example, is helpful here. That, oh, if the students are coming with a better preparation for the course, are they having a head start or not, versus the students who, for example, don't have a lot of math prereqs or a lot of programming prereqs, like how is it going to look like for them interacting with the system? So all of these data points, we talked about collecting them. We talked about logs. We talked about surveys and focus groups, and also outcome comparison across different cohorts. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the sharing part and I'll go to the cluster 2. So now think about, you are part of cluster 2. What was cluster 2? Cluster 2 was the cluster of doing faculty development or creating AI literacy or improving AI literacy for students and faculty. But also generally, how are we currently evaluating faculty professional development? and evaluate whether those PD efforts are effective or not effective. So how do we evaluate those systems? So share it here so we can kind of see whether any of those information would be helpful for the AI literacy improvement projects. Sorry, I'll move this from the QR code so you guys can scan it. Pre-post surveys is definitely one of the easiest and to-go ways for doing these kinds of evaluation. Like, what's your understanding of AI? How many AI tools are you using? How many of these tools have you heard about? Or like a specific things that you're in your training you're going to go through and do the same evaluation in the post survey. But also generally doing surveys. Both quantitative and qualitative questions can be included in these kinds of surveys. I don't think that for PDs, you need to have validated surveys. It's like mostly I would think that those validated surveys are helpful for just measuring academic and non-academic signals from students. But off the top of my head, I don't remember any validated surveys that we can use for PD evaluation. Okay, so we talked about all of these factors. We talked about the fact that definitely pre-post surveys are helpful for cluster 2 types projects. We could also think about rubric review with faculty designed artifacts. Like, for example, if faculty are creating curriculum after they go through the AI literacy PD that you run through your program, you could have a certain rubric and evaluate their artifacts and evaluate their classrooms, evaluate their curriculum. So all of those things would be helpful. And on top of that, you can get the student feedback. In a pre-semester without those interventions and without those faculty participating in your faculty PD sessions and after that. So that's why having these kinds of conversation right now is helpful so that you can now go ahead and collect that data. So that's kind of your pre-data. And then you can compare it with the post data and how much improvement you're getting by involving faculty in the PD activities that you have. So the type of data, again, we talked about it, the artifacts from the training, some syllabi examples, student surveys, or just generally looking at instructional access tools. So again, I'm going to skip the sharing part and we'll get to the cluster 3. So now similar question, but it's a little bit different because now we're talking about in cluster 3, we're talking about curriculum development types of projects with AI. So assume that you're designing a curriculum with AI. What data should you collect so that you can evaluate the effectiveness and quality of your curriculum? So again, these are the cases that like when we create new things and when we change a course, when we create a new curriculum, we need to think about evaluating its impact. So retention and success rate is important. So this is where, sorry, let me go back. This is where having historical data is helpful. So, so we're talking about using your projects to build new things at institutions, but you definitely need to actually have some baseline data. So if you have access to those baseline data of like retention rate, passing rate of the courses, make sure that you collect them before you do intervention and you see the improvement in retention rate and success rate. Preferences, alumni survey, performance of the students, confidence, self-efficacy of the students. Yes, a lot of those non-academic indicators that we talked about, sense of belonging, science identity, science motivation, sense of belonging, all of those things are really relevant in these cases to see how having access to AI is going to improve a student's belongingness metrics generally, if you think about it. Okay, so what did we talk about? So we said that in the curriculum development with AI cluster types of projects, always pre-post is also going to be valid. the rubric-based evaluation of the things that we're creating is important. Qualitative interviews, case studies, quantitative kind of surveys, both being pre-post kind of scenarios where you can kind of build a baseline of where students are coming from and where students are leaving after taking that course. So we can take a look at course grades, we can take a look at the tool usage, engagement status, if like the curriculum or the tool is deployed in the course, or just also looking at just doing interviews with faculty and seeing their debrief as well. So again, I'm going to skip the sharing part. So hopefully in the future workshops, we'll get more time to talk about the sharing between the projects, but we really wanted to make sure that these evaluation types, you think about them before like you actually dive deep into the evaluation, and also think about what kind of data you should collect and what kind of data, historical data, in addition to that you should collect. And if you're doing, for example, the kind of pre-post evaluation, like you really need to get your survey and your questions together so you can have a valid pre-post evaluation before your intervention goes into effect. So given that we're 10 minutes to time, I'm going to go through a wrap up. So what we talked about today, and we're going to share slides with everyone, is different evaluation types. So it was kind of good to see like everything in one space and kind of deciding that depending on my project, what are different kinds of evaluations that I want to use, and then what kind of data should we collect so that we can do those kinds of evaluation as well. And we took a look at some examples of cluster specific considerations and evaluations that are like more important in one cluster versus another cluster. But as we talked about as we like interacted with some of you and talked about some of the concerns that you have with your projects, obviously there is difficulty in collecting data and collecting historical data and establishing a baseline and just being able to make any causal, establish some kind of a causal relationship between like your system, your curriculum, your PD and your project versus improved outcomes. So that's why there is a really important data collection phase that the projects need to generally go through. One other difficulty is evaluating non-cognitive outcomes and non-academic outcomes. We do it generally through validated survey instruments that I shared with all of you. But if you think about like your project is specifically targeting a specific non-cognitive outcome, let us know. We'll try to find a validated survey instrument that you can actually use. This is very important to me, and this came up in one of the breakout discussions that we had last time about faculty overload in terms of the faculty should not be asked to collect more data and do more with the limited resources that we have. So we really need to be mindful of, if you're involving faculty in our development, how should we compensate them? How should we make sure that we're not adding yet another thing on top of the things that they're doing in their classroom, but also just try to help us streamline their processes in their courses and in their like daily practices. And also another thing that's really important is to log data meaningfully and log all the data and keep data organized. So that's a challenge, but make sure that you start doing that from the beginning. Now is summer, we have time, and we're just going to establish the start of the project really meaningfully. So spend a lot of time thinking about how you want to log data and how you want to store the data as well. So one more information that we wanted to share is that I have opened my calendar to do half-hour meetings with the projects. So initially, I'm thinking that as just the starting point for folks who came to today's workshop, I have some openings on Thursday, Friday, and Monday. If you go to this link and you propose a time, then I'll go through all the requests and I'll work with our Learning Lab colleagues to prioritize projects based on needs. and I will send confirmation emails to you all, booking half-hour meetings to just kind of make sure that any project-specific questions that you have can be answered. We are going to send the link in the chat. We're also going to share slides with you all, so you can book an appointment after the meeting. With that, are there any questions that we can answer? There is still a little bit of time that we have left that we can go through anything that would be helpful. Any questions that you have? Yes, please go ahead.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on quasi-experimental, especially, so I understand one of the bias you could have is where you have all the students self-selected into one group. Well, what other type of expectation, what type of other negative impact that I should be looking out for?
One thing that I've done in my research generally is that, yes, there's always the issue that the majority of the students will self-select into one specific category, and then it will not leave you with like a fully randomized settings that you want. But one thing that is helpful is that if you take a look at the characteristic of the group that did not opt into being part of the treatment group, or the group that uses a tool, uses a new curriculum. And if that group, performance of that group, or the characteristics of that group is in line with historical trends. Like, for example, if you've been teaching a course and you have log of students, for example, attempts at different problems in the course, right? And then you're looking at some of those characteristics, and this group is aligned with historical trends, you could make an argument that this second group that did not self-select into using the tool or the curriculum or intervention shows similar trends as a non-treatment group without any of those biases. But obviously, it's really hard to establish that, and usually you won't be able to establish that. So that's why it's a hard thing to do, but that's the only thing that you can actually do in the educational settings. So one thing, actually, this is also slightly relevant that I want to show that I've done is because I want to show you why this like really saying that collect historical data is important. So for example, this is a work that we had done on just deploying an AI tutoring systems in programming course. And obviously students self-select to use the tool, and like 80% of students self-select that they want to use the tool. But the way that we're basically establishing the improvement, so this is, for example, improvement in terms of the time. So the y-axis is the fraction of the students that completed the assignment below the average time. And we wanted to show that, okay, like this red line is the historical trend. So you can kind of see that the historical trend, we're saying that we're collecting data from 2021, 2022, and 2023, and then we're comparing it with the semester that we had this bot only for students who used the bot. So technically in this setting, I'm not looking at the performance of the students who did not select to use the bot. So they're just basically out the picture. But what I'm doing the comparison on is that the students who did select to use the bot, this is the green line, versus all the historical trends. I think that's the cleanest way that you can do this evaluation. The other thing that I want to raise awareness is that if you want to really compare the difference between the students who self-selected to use, for example, a system with AI or a curriculum with AI versus the students who did not self-select to use it, you have to also be aware that the students have access to ChatGPT and all different AI that's not your AI, right? So just evaluating whether that's an impact of your AI or another AI, or like whether that's just lack of AI entirely, is really difficult. That's why in most of these evaluations, we go back and do evaluation on the semesters or the years that we did not have ChatGPT this like widely used by students. So I think that's kind of the cleanest way that you can think about these kinds of evaluation, because there's always this kind of cross-contamination that exists with ChatGPT and all other different AI sources as well. But thank you for the question. I really wanted to mention that like having a clean experimental setup is really important. And like when you do divide the student groups into different categories, you don't need to evaluate everything on all the students. You basically have a population of interest that is basically using your system versus like historical trends that you can actually use. Thanks for the question. All right. So hopefully I'll get to meet some of you in these one-on-ones. I'm happy to sit down, learn more about your projects, and help shape the evaluation and shape the direction of your projects. So thank you for coming. We also have our usual surveys at the end of the workshop. So if you can scan this QR code or go to bit.ly/LL-evaluation-4, because this was our first workshop, I would love to hear about how this workshop was helpful or what we can do to improve it, and suggestions for future workshops maybe. So thanks again for joining. We're roughly at 1. So thank you all. It was good to see everybody and hear about your projects as well. Thanks. Bye.